Welcome back to Context. We are joined this morning by Breanne Smedley, elite performance coach for female athletes and head volleyball coach at Columbia River High School in Washington State. Coach, thanks for getting up early and getting on the mic with us today.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. Let's jump into this thing. And you've got a couple different threads that you're working with: coaching, teaching, side business that you're building into the real business. But before we go down that route, let's try to figure out how you got here. So take us through your background as a coach. How did you end up in the space? And, what was your process for landing your first coaching job after your playing career?
Yeah, great question. Sometimes as coaches, we're like, how did I end up here? We look back, how did I get myself wrapped up in all of this goodness? So my coaching career really, and the story of our business really started as a player. So I played a lot of sports, a lot of competitive sports growing up, like most coaches, and volleyball was the one that really was my passion. So played throughout high school up here in Washington, played competitively, played club year round, and, was a pretty talented player. And I, on the inside though, really struggled with the mental side of the game. And this will make sense in a little bit as I continue with this. But, I was starting to get recruited my junior and senior year of high school to play in college. And by the time I was a senior and was, again, playing a lot, I actually surprised everybody and decided to quit volleyball. It's like, I'm all done. I told everyone I was burned out and I didn't want to play in college. And this was the end of my journey. So it's been a good ride. That wasn't actually the end. But I ended up going to school up here in Washington at Western Washington University. And I, went to every single one of their volleyball matches. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're so good. They made it to the national championship that year. And I was like, I think I miss volleyball. And actually got an opportunity. I reached out to the coach and was like, I told her my story. I'm like, is there just any way? Like, I'm just going to try. And she was like, why don't you come? Right after they got done with their ride at the national championship, they hosted a tryout for me. And I was like, oh man. So I go try out. It was just me and the team. Did my thing, left, and it was like, well, at least I tried. I put myself out there. She called me back a few days later and brought me into her office and was like, hey, how do you think you did? I'm like, well, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. How do you think I did? I'll never forget what she said. She was like, we thought you did awesome and we want to offer you a walk-on spot on our team. And I was like elated, so happy. And it was a walk-on spot. And those of you that know, like, walk-on is a lot different than a scholarship athlete. Like, I was low man, coming in, I had to work my tail off. But honestly, I am so grateful that I got the opportunity to play at Western Washington University because Diana Flick, she runs a program that highly prioritizes the mental health and the mental training of her athletes. And that's really when I got a taste of mental training and kind of that side of the sport, and that I could actually learn skills, and confidence and mental skills was actually something that could be developed. And it's really not until looking back now that I see why I actually quit in the first place. And that was that I couldn't handle the pressure. On the inside, I was like, I don't want to let people down. What if I go and play in college and I'm not that good? And now I'm like, all of these people that have these expectations for me, I can't live up to them. And it was just easier to quit than to like deal with that later. Mm-hmm. So through this process of playing in college, by the time I was a senior, I was a full ride scholarship athlete. I was a starter. I had, I was loving volleyball. I was enjoying it. I was playing the best volleyball of my career. So naturally I graduated and went into teaching and coaching to serve other athletes and other students who, were similar to me. And my first head coaching job was at a small town here in Washington on Whidbey Island. It's Coopville High School. And I, basically was like, all right, here's your team, here's your clipboard, here's your whistle. And I was like, oh, I guess my first head coaching job, I was a club coach. I also coached club alongside everything. Yeah, I even coached club while I was still in in college. And anyways, I got into it and quickly realized that these girls also struggle with like these same mental skills. Like they have talent and I can teach the volleyball skills, but why can't they like serve in on game point? Or how come when we have a lead and then we lose? How does this happen? You know, are these girls that are playing so well in practice and then they fall apart in a game? And these girls that like I'm like, I believe in you. I see your talent. I see your skills. Why don't you see that? Like, why don't you believe in yourself in the same way that I do? And I'm like, gosh, this is exactly like I'm seeing a mirror of myself right here in high school. And so I coached at that high school for a few years, and then my husband and I moved relocated back to where we grew up here in Vancouver, Washington. We both became head coaches at Columbia River High School. So my husband is the head football coach. I'm the head volleyball coach, which is a crazy combination, but fun. And, you know, that's even when I moved down here, I was like, oh, it's the same. I like kids are the same everywhere. And I need to figure out this mental side of it. This is what's hanging them up. So I, sought out programs, training resources, and certifications in becoming an elite performance coach. To learn the mental side of the game and really dive into like, how can we help equip athletes with these skills to perform under pressure, to believe in themselves, to come back from mistakes and not let like one mistake turn into 3, 4, or 5. Now they're crying and, on the bench. And so I became this elite performance coach. And then kind of as a result of that, my sister-in-law, this is where a crazy turn in the story, my sister-in-law, Kristina, we both share a passion in empowering and enabling females and women. And so we joined forces to actually build a business out of helping female athletes cultivate confidence and mental skills in themselves, on the court and off the court. So we started our business 4 years ago, and now we serve female athletes and their moms. And we help them with these skills of confidence, but also learn how to level up in their sport. And then we also serve the moms on how they can best support their athletes. And then we also serve coaches. So we know that coaches are like, how do I do this? I know it's the missing link, but how do I do this with my team? So that's kind of where we are right now. Yeah.
There is so much that I want to follow up on, and this might have to be a 2-part episode, but we're going to definitely dive in here and talk about a few things and weave it back in between the physical sport coaching that you do and the mental coaching that you do that obviously transcends volleyball into these other spaces. So I want to talk about a few things and I'm going to weave back and forth. But first thing I'm curious about, going from a high-level high school player, quitting, and then walking onto the team. And as you mentioned, you are at the bottom of the totem pole and you have to work your way up. Talk about that transition and what that did for your confidence to go from, hey, I'm really good, to, hey, I'm not at the bottom and I'm just lucky to be here. Can you share that transition and what you learned from that moment experience that you were then able to translate into your own approach as a head coach?
Yeah, good question. Because that was, it's the whole like big fish, little pond thing. And now all of a sudden I was like, oh, wow, I am way at the bottom here. And the thing about it is I'm so grateful that that actually happened, because it was my decision to join that team. I mean, obviously it was also the coach had a lot to do with it too, but meaning I was the one that was like, I am making this decision for myself. I want to pursue this. And so when I was offered that walk-on spot, I was like you said, I'm just grateful to be here. Like, I don't care if I am getting a scholarship. I don't care if I ever see the court. Like, I am just happy to be able to play this sport again, because I realized that I missed it. And I realized it was a big piece of me. And the thing that was holding me back wasn't that I didn't love the sport. It was the pressure that I was putting on myself. And so if I can work through that and I can, reframe that, then it's absolutely worth it for me to continue this sport. So, so while it was tough, at the same time, it actually took a lot of pressure off of me, because I wasn't the one, I didn't have the expectations on me. All I had to do was show up and work hard every day. And I was like, I can do that, and that did lead to, becoming, by the time I was a senior, I was getting playing time and had that scholarship. But, all I had to do was just work hard. And, I was happy to do that, surrounded by a team that I loved. And that also just shows that, that mental shift is possible. It's all how you frame it, and so having like that lens of like gratitude of like, I'm just grateful to be out here playing, really does impact like your experience. And it impacted my experience as well, because, every day I got to play was another day that I was happy and working towards my goals. So yeah, there was that. And then how that translates to being a head coach. I mean, that's a great question, because personally, it impacts how I show up every day, and it shows, how my mental state and like what I choose to think about and how I choose to view, how I'm showing up for these girls is really a lot in my control. And then also how I get to model that for the girls as well is an important part of it, so yeah. And just kind of sharing that I share that story with them often too, to, when we talk about roles and we talk about like, what your role is here and what you can do in practice to influence that. And, how my role when I was a beginner was, a blocking sub, if we know that I would go in and block and come out. And, and I was like, I was happy to do it. I was happy to be the blocking sub and be the practice player that made the starters better. And, that really impacts, I think that story really influences the girls on my team who share that role right now. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really informative for a couple of reasons. One, you are able to put yourself in two different places, right? I've been the elite player and now I have beginner's mind, and now I can empathize with everybody on my team and figure out where, if you're just happy to be there, you probably play with a lot more reckless abandon than if you feel like you have to be X and you're worried about what the outcome is versus just being part of the process. So I think that probably was super helpful. The other thing that I'm curious about, because you mentioned you need to, you had coached club, you had done coaching, you had played at a high level, but now you're the new head coach at a school. From a volleyball perspective, not the mental coaching piece yet, and not even the tactical volleyball stuff. Maybe it is tactical, but what did you realize when you took that first head job? And then when you moved to your next head job, that even though you had this background, it's like you realize you need to figure out quickly or it was going to be a disaster.
Oh my gosh, so much. I don't even know where to start with that, because you think, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, and as coaches, we know this, like we think, well, I've played at a high level, like it should just come naturally. Coaching should come naturally, and it doesn't. And like not every player is like me. And although I've had a lot of different experiences, being the beginner, being the high level player, my personality is different than every single one of my players. And like the way I receive feedback is different. And so I'm like, I have 36 girls here and they all need something different from me. And I was like, how do I connect with them? So immediately I got into like trying to find like leadership resources, mental training, like things that I could do to connect with my players and figure out like how can I get to know them and figure out what they need from me. Because this is not going the direction I want to, because not every person is like me. And if I coach just how I want to be coached or how I was coached, we're not going to be successful. So that was, I think, the thing I needed to figure out quickly. And it was the same, I got my feet, I got kind of a system and going on my first head coaching job. I was there for 3 years, I believe. And, so I really got to like get some things in place. And what I saw was foundational and successful, even with like feeder programs and getting the middle school athletes involved, and kind of just took that and replicated it at a bigger school where we are now. And it works the same way. So, it's like, we have to prioritize that connection with our players. We have to get to know them. We have to work on the mental side of it. I mean, coaches know this. Our list is very long when we think about the hats that we wear. So
Yes. And you now, I don't want to say have upgraded, because that's not fair, because every situation is different. But from a size standpoint of school, from a program standpoint of just sheer numbers, moving from one place to another, and you said we've got kind of a system that we can replicate. I'm sure that in theory, that was a great idea. And then when you got to the new place, it was, Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. What did you realize there that, oh, wow, I thought I had this figured out, and no, I really don't. Now, the relationship piece is obviously front of mind. And it's funny, like you said, on all of these, very rarely is somebody like, yeah, I had to figure out the X's and O's to be really good. No, it was like, you said it. Every kid is different, and I need to meet them where they are. So that's super important. And so in that transition, what didn't work anymore? And what is the best thing you do in your program? And you've already mentioned, I mean, obviously I know what this is, but that you took with you and you will continue to take with you both into your business and if you end up coaching again.
Right. Yeah. So what didn't work, the obvious thing. So I came from a school, it was a one elementary, one middle, one high school town. Right. And so there was like a natural progression, natural feeder, natural like pride there. Where I'm now, it doesn't have that. Like there's, I think there's like 50 elementary schools, there's 10 middle schools, and they can go wherever for high school. And so just being like, okay, everybody, like, we're all gonna like have the same journey and same path, like didn't quite work the same way. So everything is just like bigger. There's a lot more processes, and there's, things aren't quite as simple when you're at a bigger school. There's like transfers and, there's things like that happen. And so that was hard for me as a coach, because it was like, oh man, we have to work harder to create this like program of like unity and pride that people don't want to leave and want to come to, like they flock to, because they want to be part of this because it's something special. Whereas at the other high school, it was like, you can't go anywhere else. This is where you're going. And so, in that sense, I really had to, I don't want to say work harder, work differently, to make sure that the culture was something that people just wanted to be a part of and never wanted to leave, because they felt seen and felt heard and felt special. And so I feel like that was a big one that, I really had to reevaluate that when I moved. And then as far as what makes the program different, and is that where the second one was?
Yeah, it's, you had to do it one way, then you had to do it another way, better, worse, whatever, a little bit different, tweaks here and there, some things sustained. Right. What have you settled on after years of doing this now and finding success both as an athlete and now a coach, that regardless of your next stop, this is coming with me because it has such a large ripple effect on culture and success that no matter what, we are doing X, and here's why.
Yeah. There's a couple things, but obviously the one that comes to mind is equipping athletes with the mental skills and the confidence that they need to perform well in their sport. Because if athletes can do that individually, so they develop that deep sense of belief in themselves, so they trust themselves, they have the skills to overcome mistakes, challenges, failures. They know how to properly prepare for a match and deal with those nerves and play well. Like if they take care of that, our whole program is going to be strong. And we talk about like how powerful our thoughts are and how powerful our words are and our actions, and the way that we talk about ourselves influences how we show up as a person and how we show up as a teammate. And we influence the energy around us and on the court and off the court. And so if we have these girls, and I say 36 girls because that's the size of our program, with 3 teams, if we have 36 girls that are trusting themselves, believing in themselves, having like unshakable confidence in themselves, playing their best, playing free, so that they know they can make a mistake, that's not the worst thing that's ever going to happen to them. Our program is going to be strong and united. And so that's where we start, with those individual skills and equipping girls, and also not just equipping them with the skills to navigate them, but also just allowing them to feel seen, that like what they're facing is not unique. Because I know when I was an athlete, I was like, am I the only one that feels this like enormous pressure? You know, am I the only one that gets like so nervous before a game that like I feel like I could like throw up? Am I the only one that feels like if I make a mistake, I'm going to let everyone down? And so, the answer is no. Like every single athlete at every level faces these things, but if we don't talk about it, athletes feel like they're alone in it, and they then are like, I don't know what to do, so I'm just gonna like hesitate. I'm not gonna play my best. I'm gonna like, just not do well. And it'd just be easier for me to like not go for that ball and be the one that makes the mistake, like then to go for it and be the one that made a mistake and let my team down. And so if we can, really handle that with just the individual athlete and get her to believe in herself and give her not only that belief, but the skills, to handle these situations, then we're going to be strong as a program. So.
I love that. And we're going to press pause on that because, like I said, we're going to turn this into a two-parter, and we're going to come back and we're going to actually teach some of this in a minute. Okay. However, you are in such a unique situation being married to another coach who's not a volleyball coach, football coach. And something I'm always curious about for our guests and just in general, other people that I work with that I'm come into contact with, is this idea of sport discipline. So as a volleyball coach, are you going to get better by watching other volleyball coaches? Can you get better by watching other sports and then figuring out, oh, hey, that's transferable? And so, because we were talking before the podcast and you were sharing how last night was Friday night and you guys got home and you had to debrief the football game, what have you learned from coaches that are not in your sport discipline? What have you learned watching them practice, play, picking their brain that you have been able to apply to your own practice, both as a volleyball coach and as this performance coach?
Yeah, great question. And I'm really lucky because at the high school at Columbia River, we have a network of coaches that are so strong. Like our programs are all really strong, and the coaches are just amazing people. And then obviously I'm married to a coach, which there's pros and cons to that, everybody. But one of the pros, last night as we were debriefing his game at 2 a.m, I don't know if I actually remember most of that. But we talk sports like nonstop. And I guess I shouldn't say sports, but we talk coaching nonstop and how to get the most out of our kids. And I have learned a lot from my husband. I know he's learned a lot from my program, and our programs do a lot of similar things. And one thing that I've learned from just watching Brett's program, coaching football, just the type of coach that he is, he just greatly influences his athletes just by the energy that he brings to practice. And I know this is something really simple, but like he's a lot more, I don't know, demonstrative than I am. Like he's very, he gets hyped. He's like all about like just, celebrating his athletes and finding and focusing on the good, and which we know is important. But then like as coaches, we're kind of trained to like see the negative. Like we're trained to correct and criticize. And sometimes our athletes don't see it like that. They're like, oh, can you tell me something that I did well? And, just learning from him, and just knowing that like we have, as coaches, we have an enormous impact on the energy and how our players perform, and just in how we show up. And so like him, like when I watch him at practice or watch him on the sidelines, I'm like, dang, he's really like moving the trajectory and the energy of this game just in how he is like interacting with his players. And I just feel like that can't be like something that's overemphasized, because sometimes we think like we don't have much control. But we do, just in like our mindset and how we decide to show up, regardless of what happened in our day. And also sharing with our athletes, like, I'm not at my best today, but I'm giving you my best. And I've learned that a lot just from watching him. So
important takeaway there. you can control the energy in your space. You are responsible for that. That's a controllable aspect, right? Versus some of these other things that may not be, right?
Mhm.
You get hit by a car on the way to practice. Can't control that. But how do you respond? How do you show up for your athletes? And how can you watch other people who are the model of that and learn, steal, implement? So thank you for sharing that, because I think it's something that's often underrepresented. And what you just said is, as coaches, we're trained to see the negative. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think we're wired in a way that we're always trying to get better. So our focus is, where can I move the needle versus, hey, I did this really well. Pin, get back to how we can get better, which comes across to the athletes as, I'm terrible and I can never do it right. So I think that you mentioning that and the transformation that has for athletes is super important. And I hope people are able to grab that from listening. Let me ask this question, and you've already touched on it a little bit, but I wonder if there's a few tangibles, maybe even just one that you can point to. That's, when I started coaching, this was my approach. And as I've grown and matured as a coach, this is now how I handle these things, and in the way in which your approach has changed or evolved. Is there something you could really kind of point to that says, this has been really transformational, not just for me, but for people in my circle, that, the way we grew up was different? And it's not that the kids are different, but the research and the evolution has proven that this is the approach that we should have these days.
Yeah, I almost am embarrassed at my first year coaching. And I hear that that's like a good thing, right? But I do wish I could like do that over in a lot of ways. When I first started coaching was just very like, no nonsense, I think is still okay. Like, it's still part of me, but to the point where it was like not really understanding. I feel like when I look back, I would be interested to talk to those athletes now that they're, gosh, almost 25, 20, 28 years old now. But it was like, I don't want to hear your excuse. Like, you weren't at practice on time. There's no excuse possible, that you could tell me that would make that okay. I didn't want to hear it. Like, you forgot, you didn't wear the right shirt. Nope. Like, I don't care if whatever happened, like, you need to make sure that should be your number one priority, is making sure that shirt makes it into your bag. And I'm like, looking back, I'm like, why did I do that? Because I had this expectation that like this program, like, high achieving programs, we all look the same, we all act the same, we're very disciplined, you fold your stuff and you put it here, like, you can't have stuff, take care of your space. But and I agree with that, like, we should be disciplined, we should take care of our space. But my approach to holding that expectation for my players was pretty negative. It was like, if you didn't do this, there was a consequence. So it was rather like, people were constantly missing the mark for me, rather than like calling them up to, like getting them bought into like, this is why we want to do this, and allowing the ownership to be on them to hold themselves accountable to like, we want to take care of our space, and like, we want to be disciplined to remember these things. And so over the years, like, I don't want to say like, oh, I've just become more soft, but I think for me, I've become a lot more understanding and empathetic of like where players are coming from, and like that they have so much on their plates, and remembering the shirt might not be as important as like that fight that they had last night with their parents. And, at our school, we have IB program, and these girls are taking 8 classes and, playing club and playing high school, and they're getting 3 hours of sleep. And, so I'm like, okay, that needs to be taken care of, rather than like, okay, you were late to practice, everyone on the line. It's okay, hey, what happened? Like, why, and just kind of building that connection. Because that's when that understanding comes from. And that's when the player's like, okay, she cares about me, and I want to be on practice. I want to be on time because like, this matters to me, not like, oh, I don't want to make the whole team run. And so yeah, like I said, I'm like, gosh, why did I do that? But, now I feel like like the girls are still on time. They still wear the right shirts. They still take care of their space, but it's because they have ownership over it, and they have standards for themselves. And, we're prioritizing the connection, and it's not perfect. I would not say that, but I have drastically changed my approach to how I handle those things.
Yes. And I think the key takeaway there that I heard was the ownership transfer from the coaches to the athletes. How do you teach that? How do you put the student at the center of the equation versus us as the adults, right? Yeah. And not being soft, but becoming empathetic. And it's funny because it's a common theme. And you said, oh, wow, my first players are now 28, 29, 30. And if they came and watched me now, they'd be like, Coach, you're soft. And it's like, no, I've actually learned to listen to my athletes, which I didn't have that skill when I was coaching you. And I'm sorry. And it's funny. It is a common refrain on the show. And the offering is for anybody that's young getting into this is there are things going on outside of the 2 hours that you are with these athletes that are probably more transformational than what you're doing. And how do you meet them where they are? So I love that answer. And I think it's, as you said, a good thing that you can realize that. If you didn't, it would probably be a little bit more concerning.
Right.
I have one more question, and then we're going to pivot into the performance coaching piece that I'm chomping at the bit for. And I'm going to frame it a couple different ways. What advice would you have for your younger self, which we just kind of covered, so it might not even be relevant? And what have you most recently changed your mind on from a coaching standpoint, which is, I used to believe X, and now I'm over here, and here's why. Because I don't think we all reflect in the way in which we should, just to question our belief system. And it could be about X's and O's. It could be about interactions. It can be about studying, whatever. But just if you think about that question, what can you point to that it's like, I used to believe this and I don't anymore, and here's why.
That's a great question. Advice for younger self, I would add on to actually this advice another coach gave me earlier on in my coaching career, but I wish I would have actually taken it to heart, was to focus on like the 80-20, like 80% of the people who you're starting, and I'm talking like parents and players and stuff, are going to be like on board with what you're doing, and it's gonna be great. And there's gonna be 20% in any situation where they're not, and that is okay. Like, it's okay to have people who don't like you. It's okay to have people who differ from your personality and your opinion. And there's going to be people who just like, they want to complain because they want to complain, and to not take those things to heart, and to focus on the 80%. And we really, instead of the 20%. And so like, I would get hung up as a young coach. I would couldn't sleep if I got an email that was even like slightly critical of something that I was doing, and I would go back and be like, ugh, it's drop in the bucket. Like, there's other stuff going on with that parent too. And, just come out of a place the same way you do with your players now, like with empathy. And they just a lot of times parents just want to be seen and heard, and to not take it personally. So I would tell that, to my younger self as well. And I'm still even working on that for a little bit. What did I used to believe that I don't believe now? That is such a good question. I know that there's an answer that, like in a couple hours, I'll be like, that's what I should have said. But
well, hold on it then. I'm going to give you a little more time to think, and I'm going to tell you where it came from, and maybe this will jog something. And again, it doesn't even have to be coaching related. It can be about parenting. I mean, who knows? But I'm on a bike ride and I'm listening to this guy, Dave Stahoviak, and he asks at the end of every one of his podcasts, it's called Coaching for Leaders. And I get home and I run into the house and I'm super excited about it. And I'm like, wife, daughter, and they're just like, I don't know. And then I read this book called Think Again by Adam Grant over the summer, which is really just about re-examining your belief system. And he gave this analogy. He's like, hey, if you walked in and you saw your husband using Windows 95 on his computer, you would ask him, what are you doing? Like, there's like this new system. Yet, if he was spouting out some belief that he acquired in 1995 and his opinion hadn't changed in 30 years, you would be like, cool, no problem. Yeah, you sound really grounded in that. And it makes a ton of sense.
Right.
What's the difference? Like, why are we not reevaluating that? Right. So it's more along the lines of, we should all be reconsidering our belief system daily. So whatever fits into that, I think, are just offerings, no matter how trivial you might think they are, that land for people to begin this process of self-reflection.
Yeah. Gosh, yeah. When you say it like that, there's a lot of things. But one overarching, and hopefully this isn't too broad, but my mind has changed that there's like a set path, and like, that you need to follow the set path. I used to think I kind of had a belief about like, go to college and then get into teaching and coaching, and that's all you can be, as like a teacher and a coach, and like kind of becomes your identity. And I think you could probably relate with this too. When I started the business, it was like this, like almost like imposter syndrome. Like, should I be doing this? Like, this is in alignment with what I'm doing, but it's a little different. What are people going to think differently of me? Or like, who is she to think that she could like run her own business? And so I've changed my mind that like, you can change your mind about things, and that you can, I know that's kind of meta, but like, you can change your path, you can change your mind. And if something either is moving in a direction that you don't like, you can change it. And that's okay. And that's part of life. And you don't have to stay stuck in something either that, isn't serving you at the moment. And that there's like seasons in life where, like at that season in my life, this is what I was doing. And just because maybe I'm not choosing to do that anymore, doesn't mean that wasn't a valuable piece of who I am now. So I know that might be a little broad, but I have changed my mind about being able to change your mind. So
I think that's the key. And you said to me earlier that you have a 4-month-old. I just put my eldest in college a week ago. And when they become teenagers, whatever you say or do that might be out of alignment, they're going to call you names and try to take you to task for it. And what you just said, I think, is the important piece. There are seasons and you can change your mind. And it doesn't mean you're a hypocrite. It means that you've reevaluated. And here is what's important now, even though this used to be what made sense. And I think that's such an important nugget, not just for our coaches, but for anyone listening, that you can change your mind. Today is a new day. I can start over. I don't have to wait till January 1st for my New Year's resolution. So thank you for sharing that. Like I said, you may think it's trivial, but people that want to read between the lines, they can get that out of that. So thank you for sharing that. Okay. Part 2, we're pivoting now. Performance coaching, empowering female athletes, but I'm sure this would work for males as well.
Absolutely.
My daughter is a volleyball player. I don't know a ton about volleyball. I watch it. I'm a basketball coach. I struggle with volleyball because there's not a clock. So the game might last 30 minutes. It might last 4 hours. Who knows? But what I can tell you that fascinates me is that in volleyball, you could win a set 25-9, and then you can lose the next set. And it's like, in basketball, that can happen in the NBA. Like, you win one quarter and then the next quarter you get blown out. That doesn't happen in high school or college basketball, right? If you're pounding a team, like, it's pretty much set. That's going to continue. But volleyball to me is so fascinating because that can flip on a dime, and the momentum piece is so powerful that it drives me nuts. And our team is young. They're learning, they're growing. They have what you mentioned. How do we get this serve in when, the game is on the line? So framing that for myself more than anything, but also so that you can talk about some of these tools that you have to offer in your business. Can you give us a generalized path, a generalized lesson on, hey, here's what you need to do to go from inconsistent to consistent based on the confidence, the belief, and the empowerment that you're trying to share with these athletes. Like, let's have a class right now. Let's figure this thing out.
Okay, well, we're going to start with a little math in this class. So what I tell athletes, and what is true, is that like elite performance and being able to play to your potential is really reliant on three things: like the physical training, physical side, like you go to practice, you train your body; the knowledge of the sport, like you have to know a little bit about X's and O's and strategy and tactics; and then the mental training, like you have to get your mind on board. And they all multiply. Like if we're going to go physical times mental times knowledge of the sport, if any one of those is at zero, the whole thing is zero. Right? So that's your math lesson. If you multiply anything by zero, the whole equation ends up being zero.
No matter what, if you multiply by zero, it equals zero.
Yeah, that's one thing I took away from math. So, like sometimes we are really good physically. And, that was my story was, I was talented and, I had good knowledge of the sport, but my mental skills were low when I was in high school and the whole equation was zero. I quit. Okay. That was the reality for me. And so like at best, the athletes are not going to play to their potential if any one of those is zero. And at worst, they might stop playing their sport. Like it's just totally done for them. And so that's why it's so important that we have all three. So mental training can't replace physical training, right? Like we need it all. I'm not saying that, that can happen. You can't like visualize being able to dunk a basketball and then like, if you've never done it before and then just go out and do it. Sorry to burst your bubble.
Wait,
maybe I don't.
Seriously, I can't just visualize dunking and then it happens.
I know. It really is a bummer for a lot of people, but visualization is one of the key parts of mental training. If you can like visualize, there's a lot of science behind visualization, but visualize a skill that you want to perform, and you have like the physical side of it that you are practicing and you have the knowledge of it, that's where like the magic happens. And that's where like that mental side can just multiply what you're already doing in the gym, and what you already are learning. Those mental skills really just like bring it to the next level. So I would say in order to like the first place to start for allowing players to access this is to re-examine their self-talk. So we always go to like, what are we telling ourselves? Because what we think about most becomes our reality. And what we think about, we move towards what we think about most. And so one of the things that we teach in our programs, it's like a foundational thing that we teach, is something called the thought wheel. And so if you kind of can imagine like a wheel with arrows going clockwise and each arrow kind of goes into the next one, there's situations, and you were talking about this earlier in part one, there's situations that happen to us that we can either control or we can't control. Situations happen every day, but we do get to control how we think about it. Right. So the example we use with athletes a lot, because this is something that all athletes can relate with, is maybe you didn't get the playing time you wanted. That's the situation. The situation is like you got benched, or you just feel like you're not getting the playing time you want. You get to choose what you think about that situation. And so and sometimes athletes think things like, my coach hates me. They choose, the thought is, my coach hates me. That's the reason why I'm not playing. And it makes sense because our brains need to come up with it. It needs to fill in the gaps. Our brains don't like not knowing why. And so your brain's going to come up with a thought, and then you get to choose whether you are going to believe that thought. And for a lot of people, it's like, okay, the thought is, my coach hates me. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, that's why I'm not playing. I'm going to choose to hang on to that. But our thoughts, the next arrow, leads to our emotions and how we feel. Okay. So any feeling that we have, good, bad, indifferent, whatever, a feeling is just a feeling, but it's always tied to a thought. And we either are aware of that thought, or sometimes we're not, because some of those thoughts have been running on subconsciously for us for years. Right. But now, if we're choosing that thought, my coach hates me, the feeling is probably going to be like, I'm unmotivated, I'm discouraged, maybe I'm a little bitter, like definitely not feeling 100%, right? When I feel like somebody doesn't like me, especially if I'm going to practice with them every day. Okay. Feelings lead to action. So we take action or not. Inaction is also an action based on how we feel. So if I go to practice feeling unmotivated, discouraged, I don't really want to be there, I don't like my coach now because I feel like my coach doesn't like me, I'm probably not going to play my best at practice. Like, I'm not maybe going to like feel like going for a ball, like if we're talking about volleyball. I'm not going to like give it my all, like, because why should I? Because it doesn't even make a difference because my coach doesn't like me, And so I'm probably not going to play super well in practice based on that feeling that I'm having. And then the last arrow is results. Like, we get our results in life based on the action that we take or don't take. So if I am not playing well in practice, the result is going to be I'm not going to get better. And that's probably going to put me in the same situation that I was just in, which is on the bench again. And so it just reaffirms that cycle, like I'm on the bench again. See, my coach hates me. And it's just like that just gets stronger and stronger and stronger for us. And so what we like bring awareness to athletes is like, you have control, not maybe over the situation, but you have control over what you think about it. So could we change that thought to there's an opportunity here? Like, yeah, you're still benched and it's okay that you don't like that, but can we change our thought to, I don't like this, but there's an opportunity here. And now maybe I am feeling a little more optimistic. I am a little more motivated, determined. Maybe I feel like, oh, this is a challenge. I got to figure out what this is. And I go to practice with those feelings. And maybe I am asking my coach for a little more feedback. I'm working on my weaknesses. Maybe I'm watching film outside of practice. I'm doing these things to like, based on this feeling of like motivation and like optimism and I want to get better. And then the results are, I'm probably going to get better. Like in my experience, the athletes who are working hard in practice, they're working on their weaknesses, they're asking for feedback, they're watching for film, they're getting better. Like that's how you get better. And the results, like, I mean, it's not guaranteed you're going to get more playing time, but you sure as heck are going to put yourself in a better position to get more playing time. And you are probably going to be helping your team more and you're going to be improving. So like those results are going to be better. You're going to like what you're doing rather than not. So for athletes, we talk about this thought wheel and, we say like, you get to choose your thoughts. And yeah, so that's where we start.
Great. So focus 3 group talks about this being event response equals outcome, right? You like math. So situation that happens, right? What is your response is going to determine your outcome. And this is kind of a similar deal, right? If you can control your thought process, and that doesn't mean that it's all sunshines and rainbows. It's
right.
Here's the negative thought, acknowledge it, decide to change it, like you said, to an opportunity, which then will affect our emotions, and the thought wheel continues. And Point Guard College Basketball also talks about let your actions drive your emotions, not the other way around. So what is the teaching from the elite performance coach to get control of those thoughts and to change them so that the emotions, the feelings, the actions, and the results then fall into line?
Right. Yeah, there's a couple of different things that we do, but something, especially for coaches, that can be very simple that we do, even at the start of practice, is what we call like a thought download. So we just like get your thoughts out. We say 50,000 things to ourselves a day. You don't need to write down all 50,000, but like, what are the thoughts right now today that are like running around in your head? Get them out and decide which ones you want to keep. Decide which ones you're like, okay, that's ridiculous. Why am I even thinking that? Get rid of that. And which ones are you going to change to be more productive? And like you said, it doesn't have to be sunshine and rainbows. That's why I say productive thinking is more important than positive thinking. Negative thinking we know works because it will bring us down. But if we can even bring that thought to like neutral or just more productive, like, you don't have to say like, I am the best, whatever, I'm the best hitter when maybe you're not. Okay. Just what's more productive. And so that's just a simple activity. The thing that we do every day is a breathing exercise combined with visualization. And so athletes and people, we typically don't learn how to like breathe properly. Like we're going through our day breathing pretty like shallow breath. And so we teach athletes like, okay, how to take a nice deep inhale and exhale, because that slows down our nervous system. We're able to play better. Like we're relaxed. Our muscles are getting oxygen. And then as a result, we kind of get that established. That takes like 30 seconds. And then athletes create what we call affirmations out of the thoughts that they want to be thinking about themselves. So we go through a process to have them identify 3 of their main affirmations for who they want to be as players. And it could be like, I am a fast and quick defender, or like, I am a connected and supportive leader on my team, or I am a first team all league player. Like for some of our athletes who have those ambitions and who have the skills to back that up, like, and that's their goal, they have these affirmations that are first person. And then we take 10 seconds to visualize each of them. And so they see themselves being that quick, fast defender. They see it as if it's happening now. They see themselves being a supportive teammate. So they're high-fiving, they're cheering up their teammates. They're being that leader that their team needs. They see themselves that first team all league player. Like we kind of push them like, okay, well, what habits does that player have? And now see yourself doing those things. And then that's how they start practice every day. And it takes 2 minutes. And so that's why it's like, a lot of coaches, and I used to think this too, like, we don't have time for mental training, we don't, but really you're going to spend the time either way. Like you either spend 2 minutes now to like get your mind right, or you're going to spend however long hours, like not playing the potential and then having to have these like team meetings of like, why are we not doing, we've all been there. So, those are the thought download, and then doing that, we call that the braver before practice, is like, those are the 2 activities that we really rely on to help change those thoughts and get athletes thinking about what they want to think about. So.
Yes. And perfect segue into a question that is often thrown around. And I think the answer depends on every coach and every athlete's age and stage in their life. But what percentage of playing is physical and what percentage is mental? And I'm not going to pigeonhole you into an answer, but you gave us the math equation earlier: physical, knowledge, mental. So if you had to talk about volleyball in particular and say, all right, this percentage of each for the high school level, and I would then follow up and ask, would you prescribe the same percentage of training to your practice sessions that you believe is what the game actually calls for at the high school level? Mm-hmm. And if so, how do you structure that then? You gave us a couple of tools, but what does it really look like in practice for you as a on the floor coach?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I asked my athletes this when we like introduce mental training, like what percentage do you think is like mental and physical? And they all like, it varies, but everyone is 50% or higher, and I say it's all mental, because everything that we do is like created in our minds first. And so, yeah, I don't know if I could like say a specific, if I were have to say an answer, I would say like 100% of it is mental, because you like have to think through like what you're doing. And if you're not in the right mind space, like you're not going to play well. So, but obviously I'm like more biased because it's what I do every day too. And I would prescribe the same. So like, you're like, okay, well, it's 50% mental. If it's 50%, we should spend half of our practice working on mental skills. Okay.
Well, you tell me, because I run into the same thing. It's like, hey, it's not a fair answer, because your best player doesn't have to think about the skill they're trying to execute. Right. Your more novice player still has to think about rotations and being in the right spot. And so it's not an equal comparison. But I do know that as a coach, if I'm going to say, hey, with this group of athletes that I have, 50% of this is mental, I can guarantee you there hasn't been a season in 20 some odd years where I've spent 50% of my practice focusing on mental training.
But you probably have, because just stopping all physical and working on mental isn't the only way that you can do mental training. And so, yeah, we infuse like these skills throughout practice. And so, like I said, the 2 minutes where we are just like, okay, we're focusing in and we're doing 30 seconds of breathing, you're doing your affirmation visualization, and then we're going to practice. That sets the stage for athletes to like have, and like, I'll tell you, our practices are, I mean, yesterday was a Friday practices can get a little squirrely. You know, and when I don't do that exercise before those practices, like we are all over the place. And, you know, they're like, they're there, like they're distracted, they're not playing, like but when we take that 2 minutes to focus beforehand, like our practice yesterday was awesome. Like they were on point, they were focused 2 hours, you know. And so like that 2 minutes actually like transfers throughout the whole time. And then we also like, you know, teach recovery skills. So like, you know, they shank a pass in that moment mentally, you know, they're taking a breath, they're saying the reset word, they're focusing on what they want to see for the next one. So they're practicing a mental skill right there. Like we didn't stop the whole practice and we're like, okay, we're going to work on mental skills right now. Like they have the skills, you know, that they've been equipped with so that they can do them in practice. And yes, like teaching them the mistake ritual, like that tool, it takes, you know, like 15 minutes that we carved out at the beginning of the season as we were, you know, laying the foundation for our program to teach them that skill. Okay. So it took 15 minutes at the beginning when we did some onboarding stuff, but now they have that skill that they can use in any play, in any practice, any match, and they're doing mental skills, you know? So, and then like reframing thoughts, you know, their self-talk when they're like, oh, that was a bad thought. Okay, I'm going to change that real quick to something more productive. Like that doesn't take a lot of time, but they did it. You couldn't see it, but they did it. So it's infused, I guess, in a way.
I think you said two things that are really important that I want more information on. So you said a mistake ritual. I've always called it a mistake response. And, you know, one of the things that we've stolen from point guard basketball again, which was a 2 clap, right? You mess up, clap, frustration, clap to energize. And what would be the mistake ritual that you could offer that is transferable, that you have to spend 15 minutes teaching, but then empowers these athletes to let go and to move on?
Yeah, I like that. So it's it's similar, but it's more customized to athletes. So we teach, again, that breath. So it's one breath, a reset word, and a gesture of their choice. Appropriate gesture. So we again teach that like nice deep inhale. At the top of their inhale, they say what we call their reset word, and they go through a process to find their reset word based on like their best playing moment and how they felt during that time. So a lot of them say something like free, fire, confidence, relax, like whatever word best embodies like how they want to feel when they're playing their best is what they say. And then on their exhale, they do their gesture. And it's very simple. It could be a 2 clap, a snap of the finger, adjustment of the ponytail, like pull a sock up, you know, like something that is simple, small, like that they can connect with. And so that is their mistake ritual. And the key about those though, in either one, the 2 clap or mistake ritual, whatever, it needs to be practiced beforehand. So, you know, I tell athletes, like, if you're just going to try this in a competition when like the stakes are high and like you know, it's like pressure and you're like, oh, I made a mistake, I'm going to try this mistake ritual. That's like being in the middle of a match and realizing like you're out of shape. Like it's too late. There's not much you can do in that situation. So you have to practice this in practice. You have to be intentional. Like coaches, in the beginning, we're like, okay, every water break, you're going to do your mistake ritual, you know, so that it's something that your body knows to respond to. So.
I think that's also a great point. The analogy I use for that one is playing golf, which everyone, I'm sure, tried at some point in their life. And it's like, if you can't hit driver straight, but you get to the first tee and it's like, oh, I'm gonna hit driver today. It's like, that's not a great idea.
Right.
Like, you probably want to stick with the 7-iron because you haven't practiced with that one. Okay. So reframing thoughts sounds great in theory.
Yeah.
Not always this easy in practice. And, you know, if we go and watch a professional, right, you go and watch the Olympics and you're watching Team USA play volleyball, it's a whole different game, right? Or your husband's watching the NFL, it's a whole different game. And regardless of how it may or may not go, if you got to bump into one of those athletes and see them in person, I'm pretty sure you're not telling them, hey, you sucked last night, right? But you're often in your own mind telling yourself that in practice or in a game when you mess up. And so how do you teach people to be their own biggest fan the same way in which they would that athlete that they look up to is not the key, but the goal of reframing thoughts and not telling yourself lies, but the reality of your circumstance. So how do you teach that and then hold athletes accountable to that so that they can be their best self?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. It is, sometimes we go through a process or an activity to like reframe a thought and we're like, I'm feeling so good. Like that thought's not even in my mind anymore. So great. And then like 2 hours later, you're like, yeah, that thought is back. Or like, somebody said something or whatever, and it's back. And that's normal. That's like thinking that you're going to learn a skill in 30 minutes and then be like a master of that skill. Like some of these thoughts, like I said earlier, like have been running around and on repeat for so long. And like our body and our minds are used to that cycle. They're used to that feeling of thinking that thought. And so it's always going to it's going to try to bring us back. And so we have to constantly be like aware, oh, that thought is back. Here's the new thought I've already decided I'm going to tell myself when that happens. And so it's just like a constant until it becomes a new unconscious thought. And to help remind, like there's a few things that we do, but you're right. Like we wouldn't say that to an athlete, but we say that to ourselves all the time. Like you're garbage. You did, I'm the worst person on the team, whatever. Heard it all. Probably said it all to myself too. And so we try to really make, like, this is simple, but what we draw attention to gets bigger in our lives. So we're very intentional about like, okay, there's activities you can do as far as like, we're going to look back on your career, your accomplishments so far, what you're proud of, and even writing down, like today we're going to write down like 10 things that you're proud of. And athletes like struggle with that. They're like, I can just think of one thing, I got up this morning. Then it's like, no, like what, like think about things in your life that you're proud of to remind yourself what you're capable of. You've made it through 100% of your hard days so far. And even one of my private coaching clients that I worked with yesterday, a simple activity, like she's a pitcher and, pitching, hitting, and fielding, 10 things that you are good at. Like what separates you from the rest in pitching, hitting, and fielding. And I want you to write your top 10 and send it to me, because although that sounds simple, we don't do that. Like we come up with our top 10 reasons why we suck instead. And so drawing our attention to those things, reminding ourselves constantly is the key to making sure that that's where we move. And it's not like ignoring our areas of weakness, and like when we do a post-match reflection, like it's, we're talking about like the 3 things that we did well that we want to repeat, and the one thing that we're going to work on, and an action plan to improve it. Not, I'm just going to beat myself about it. So I know that sounds simple, but it's so powerful. Like some of the most powerful things are the most simple things. So,
well, I think what may have been missed there, if people aren't listening closely, is the ratio, right? It's
right. Yeah.
It's whatever the research says about positive and negative, but
Yeah.
even in your self-reflection, these are the 3 things that I did well. And here's the one that I want to work on, where we're hardwired to be the opposite there, right? Where it's like, oh, I did this well, but I did all these things wrong. And you can't change all of the things that you're struggling with at once, right? Habit reshaping has 100% failure rate when you try to work on more than one at a time, right? That's what the research says. So how do you point attention at, here's something I can improve on, and here are all the things that I'm doing well. So let me remind myself of these when I do make that mistake that I'm trying to work on. I think that's a great tool and super helpful if people can trust and they can believe in that and they can put it into a practice, a ritual, like you used the word earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask this from a coaching standpoint, because you talked about obviously what the athletes are going to need to do to execute this, but from a coaching standpoint, if you had to clear the noise, so to speak, in the fog, in the mental performance space, and you've given us a few tools, but what would you say, where there's so much information coming at us that it can be overwhelming, that are the 3 things that you would implement tomorrow, low-hanging fruit, simple to do in practice, that would be 80% of the 100 you can actually transform to your 80-20 deal, that you could offer just as, hey, I don't care what else you do X, Y, and Z starting tomorrow for the next 3 weeks, and you're going to see dramatic improvement? What would those be?
Yeah.
Or health, one.
Yeah. I think I'm trying to like reprioritize them. The thought thing that we've been talking about, like the thought download is so simple. And so like if coaches can do that, like even if that is like a once a week thing, like we're going to do a thought download, that is very simple. So download the thoughts that you're thinking, you know, and go through the process of like keep, throw away, reframe. Breathing, super simple. And even if you're like, as a coach, you're like, I don't feel like confident that my athletes would like listen to me, like bring them through a breathing exercise. You know, there's things like we have some, in fact, I'll see if I can add some to our welcome page for this podcast for our coaches that are listening. Some things that I can lead them through, you know, just some like simple breathing techniques where they're just focusing on like controlling their breath, because that's in the athlete's control. When they're in that pressure situation, they're like, I don't know what the heck to do. They can always come back to their breath, and automatically it is going to re-regulate them, you know, and just get them back to the present. So the thought download, breathing, and if coaches can like do just a tiny bit of visualization, like it's enormous. Visualizing like having athletes visualize themselves performing the skills, how they want to perform them.
Okay, stop right there.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Visualization.
Yeah.
In theory.
Yes.
Take us through what that actually looks like, Coach.
Yeah. So how we do it, and there's different visualizations for different like scenarios, but if we're going super simple, what I would do, like as the coach, you know your sport best, you know the skills best. So even if I were doing one for volleyball, and it's just, this is a general one, I would go through like the 6 skills. So I would have them close their eyes, you know, take a deep breath in, focus on their breathing just to get them like centered. And then I would have them, when we talk about visualization, you want to bring in all 5 senses. So I'm like, okay, picture yourself on the volleyball court. What do you see? What do you smell? You know, what does it feel like? What feelings are going on? Like, you know, we want to create that picture with as much detail as you can. And then I would say like, okay, you know, we're going to start with passing. So you see the ball coming into your platform. You're seeing yourself angle your platform to target. You feel the ball contact your platform. You see it perfectly going to the target. Okay. Repeat that 3 times. So they're just seeing themselves like pass how they want to pass. And move on to setting, move on to hitting, same thing. You know, so we just kind of break it down by skill. And again, this doesn't take very long. It takes probably like 2 minutes total, but they just see themselves. And then I'll even say like, hey, see yourself making a hitting error. All right. And sometimes you're like, oh no, we shouldn't visualize ourselves doing something bad, but it's going to happen. So now visualize yourself doing your mistake ritual and coming back from that. Okay. Visualize yourself now hitting again, feeling what it feels like to hit with power and control, you know, and just so that they're reframing, like when they get on the court, they're like, hey, I've already been here. And this is my new baseline of like playing well. So, yeah.
The thing that I'm not going to say it surprised me, but I think, again, maybe overlooked, is visualize yourself making an error.
Right.
Because to your point, like nobody wants to do that. And you're not trying to train them mentally to make that error, but to then go through their mistake ritual and their recovery from that. What have you seen, and how would you describe the transformation of athletes that are able to embrace that versus those that are afraid to go into that vulnerability?
Yeah. It's so huge because the athletes that aren't able to trust that they have a way to recover, either, you know, through visualization, through having a mistake ritual, they just don't ever perform to the level that we as coaches know they could. And you all know that feeling of like, or we all know that feeling of seeing the player, you're like, she could be so much better, you know, or like I've seen the magic that she does in practice, but she's not doing it in a game. And that's because she doesn't trust that, like, if she makes a mistake, she's going to be okay, or she's going to know how to come back from it. So she plays it safe. And so that's one version of the athlete that I see, is they just play it safe, you know, and it's just kind of like vanilla, and like, she won't make a lot of errors, but she's also not going to make a huge difference really, you know, and she's never going to like play to her potential. And then there's the athlete that will go for it. and makes mistakes, but then doesn't know how to recover. So it's like one mistake is 2, 3, 4. And like now she's bringing her whole team into this like storm of, frustration. And so, that's kind of the two versions of the athlete that I see who like don't trust that they have the skills to come back from that.
And what do you see from those same athletes when they do show some courage and vulnerability to lean into this? What do they look like on the backside of that?
Yeah. So they look like, they're taking risks, and that could mean like game point, or when the game is tight, they're going for it. They're, and that has like, that could work out or it could not. And so like, either it's like, yeah, big reward, or, ooh, all right, we didn't quite execute there. But what you see from the athlete is, we talk about body language. So their body language when they respond to that is less of like a poor me, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get pulled, I'm never going to try and like do this ever again. To like, hey, I got like, they do their gesture, they face their team. Okay. And they're wanting the ball back. And like, that's more of a mental thing, but you can tell also in their body language that they're like not shying away. Like, if we're talking volleyball, like they're still taking space and serve receive. They're still getting available and calling for the set. They're not like kind of making themselves small, if that makes sense.
No, completely. And I think at a high level, at the professional level, right, low hanging fruit are the Steph Currys of the world that think they're making every shot they take, no matter how many they miss, right? And then those that aren't quite as confident, and if I miss this, then I'm going to miss the next 20. And it's like, that's what you're teaching, right? It's how do you let go of this, not be attached to outcome, but to stay in the moment and repeat the moment based on what the circumstance calls for, not your fear of failure. And I think that's something that is so invaluable. And it sounds like you figured out a way to at least begin to teach this in a way that results are happening. And so what I would love to do, not quite yet, I got one more question, but I want to be able to direct people to your service, so to speak, so that they can pick these things up and work with you and figure out how to become better and perform higher. I want to go one more place here, because you said elite performance coach for female athletes. Mm-hmm. So in a world that is becoming more gender fluid, and is talking about equity and balance and all of those things, why female athletes? What have you seen with females that has led you to specifically focus on that? Even though I'm sure you also work with males, or people that are, gender fluid, but like, why females? What have you seen that led you to that space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. And you're right. I took my husband's football team through my whole program, or our whole program, and, got results there. So it's not like these skills are like only for females, but I do think that there's some nuances that, that females face both as coaches and as players in this space. And so, as an athlete, I've experienced it in our program. We talk to some things that they also apply to males, but like some body image things, and being able to advocate and speak up for yourself, because, sometimes women, like when they are being themselves and they're being leaders and they're, holding themselves and their teams accountable, they're not called a leader, they're called something else. Right. And for men, it's the opposite. They're like, it's a very strong leader. And I see that in the coaching world too. Like, our female coaches, it's like, there's, this is probably another topic for a whole podcast, but it's just seen through a different lens. If you have strong female coaches and strong leaders, it's not as celebrated as much. And we're kind of told to dial it down a little bit, and like, don't go there, and constantly kind of, even to the point where like we're not offered opportunities in the same way. And so that's why we really have targeted this, so that we really want to make sure that that females are learning how to step into their authentic selves and learning how to be leaders that embrace just who they are. And so yeah, while these skills are very, very applicable to men as well, and you know, male coaches, absolutely, we want to work with female athletes also on this, like on this one-on-one level as well, where we can be like pouring into them and encouraging them to continue to be who they are designed to be and step into their power. And, you know, all these words are kind of buzzwords and buzz phrases, but that's who Kristina and I desire to empower. And so when we bring these female athletes into our world, we can influence them on that greater level. And, you know, we can work with them a little closer in that area. So
great explanation. And I think you are definitely on point there. My eldest runs into that issue, shall we call it, as an athlete. And I mentioned to you before we jumped on this that I want to say it was episode 9, but the soccer coach at Sonoma State, Amiria Salzman, talks about that in her episode, which is, you know, to her female athletes, don't apologize for being competitive. Don't apologize for the way in which you show up, even though society is telling you differently. And so how do you embrace that to be your best self when you're getting mixed messages often as a female? And I love that you're digging into that space to help people, you know, lean into their authenticity and be okay with it and still navigate that complicated social dynamic that, as you mentioned, for men doesn't show up the same way, unfortunately. And I think, you know, the world needs more of that. And thank you for doing that. And it's a perfect transition into where can people find you? If I wanted to call you up, well, I already have your contact information, but if somebody else wanted to call you up and say, hey, look, I'm struggling with this, can you come help? Where can they find you? How can they get in touch? What services do you offer that people would definitely want to tap into?
Yeah, so we've created a little page just for your listeners. So if you go to KristinaBreanne.com/contacts, and we'll put that hopefully in the show notes so that it's easily clickable. But on there, you know, I'll throw the visualization package in there that coaches can easily use with their team. So there's 3 visualizations, a pre, post, and like a relaxation visualization that athletes can just like press play, or coaches can press play for their athletes, or even just send to their athletes that they can have like on their devices, just as something that they can do like pre-competition, post-competition, something that they need to relax. So that is a gift from me to you. And then you'll also find, you know, how you can work with us. Our signature program is called the Elite Competitor Program. And we bring individual athletes through that program, but we also bring teams through the program as well. And we've worked with a lot of teams, and it's kind of a special experience when a whole team goes through that program. It's a combination of a course and also live support from me and from Kristina. And then when teams go through, they get a little special meeting with me. We do a strategy session with the coaches on what their team needs. So you can find information about the Elite Competitor Program on there as well. My Instagram is Breanne Smedley, and that is on there also. So I provide some tips that is geared towards like moms and coaches of female athletes. My Instagram is for that. So yeah.
We forgot to talk about moms. So for the next time, we're going to have you back at some point. We'll tap into that because I mean, truth be told, that's probably a huge topic that we could spend an entire episode on. So thank you for being here today. I appreciate you taking the time. This was awesome, and looking forward to further conversation.
Yes. Thanks for having me on. This is great.